finish up our discussion of extends, let's talk about one little subtlety I mentioned earlier, where I said constructors are not inherited. Okay? So let's do a little experiment here with vengeful slist. What we're going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint here, and I'm going to start debugging, and it'll run to this position in the code. Now when I step into the constructor, it is no big surprise that I find myself here at the constructor for vengeful slist. That is what I'm doing. But whenever I click step into yet again, I find myself suddenly in the slist constructor. Okay? Well, this is a really good thing, right? Because every slist, of course, needs a sentinel. So it makes a lot of sense that we set up a sentinel and so forth, and then only then do we come back and do our deleted items. Okay? But how did it happen? What was the magic? Why did this occur? Well, let's debrief with this slide here. So constructors, you don't inherit them. But in Java, there's a rule, right, that says that any subclass constructor must start with a call to the constructor for the superclass. So you don't inherit the constructor, but you must call it. Okay? And the basic idea, the big picture, is that if every vengeful slist is an slist, then it must be set up in the same way, right? Just as a show dog, right? Like a dog that goes and performs and shows at dog shows. It is also a dog. And so it also had to be born as a dog from a mother dog and drink milk and all of those things. Those were important things about how a show dog was constructed. If you didn't call the slist constructor, the sentinel will be null. Just as a show dog, if you didn't have it be born, it's just a pile of goo, right? It has to still develop like a dog. And so what you can do is, in our case, we didn't explicitly call the constructor, right? We just said public vengeful slist, and this automatically calls the constructor for you if you don't do it, okay? But it is also possible to explicitly call the constructor, to use this keyword super here with parentheses. So instead of super.delete back or whatever, we're saying super, right? Just call the constructor. So actually, let's try that out. So I'm going to add this super call here. And now, when I run my code, we find ourselves here. We step in. We get to super. And that, of course, calls this constructor. All right? So basically, the point is you have to do it. But Java knows you're forgetful, and I'm a little surprised they did this, because it's not that hard just to put this in and make it more explicit, but it just so happens that Java will implicitly add a super if you forget to do it, okay? But the important part is that this must come first. You must actually call the superclass's constructor before anything else. So if I were to try and do, for example, super goes here, right? If I do that, you can already see that IntelliJ knows better, right? It's underlined this red. Super must be the first statement in constructor body. That's super important. Hence the name. Now, it's actually possible to call other constructors. Let's suppose you want to allow the user, suppose you want to allow the user to create vengeful slists that already have items in them. That's a thing we had with slists. You may not remember that that was the thing we were capable of, but we before had the ability to say like 9 here. Let's move this back up. So we used to have the ability to put 9 up in the slist by default. And so if we wanted to have that same feature, if we wanted to build such a constructor, right? Okay, so item x constructs a vengeful slist with the given item inserted already. Okay? That's just a thing we had for slist. You might not remember that. But in this case, if we wanted to do this, what happened to my font tabs? What's going on? So in this case, if we wanted to allow, as I said, the creation of a vengeful slist that already has an item, then we're just going to call the super constructor that takes that item, and then we will do the same. Okay. So in this case, if we tried running, just to see how this goes, if I run through the debugger and I get to this line, when I step in, I get to super x, and that brings me to this slist constructor that perhaps you don't remember exists, but we had it anyway, right? There you go, and so forth. So in this case, if we want to use another constructor, just remember you can say super with some parameter, and this needs to come first, okay? Now I'll note that it is not equivalent, right? If we took away super, it is not equivalent to omit super x in this case, because this right here makes an implicit call to the no argument constructor as opposed to the single argument constructor. And at the risk of making this part of lecture a little boring, let me take this away. Okay, we'll do this again. So we run it, we step in, and now we're finding ourselves in this S-list constructor with no argument. So our size is 0, which is not the intention of the constructor. Okay? So be aware, there's a subtle difference. All right. That seems somehow wordy, but whatever. We're going to roll with it. Okay, last note about extends. I just want to warn you that you should only be using extends to represent hypernymic relationships. So if one thing is an example of the other, right? So a vengeful S-list is an S-list. It does everything an S-list can do. It has all the personality traits and quirks. It is an S-list. And it has some extra stuff. But a common mistake is, especially for novices, but even in the Java libraries themselves, it is occasionally used for has-a relationships, which is called a meronym, by the way. And so, for example, you might be tempted to say, okay, well, we have a bathroom. Well, a shower extends bathroom, right? But this is a terrible idea. This is abominable, and in a couple weeks, I'll give some stronger examples than this one, but do not do this. You should be able to say, literally in English, a show dog is a dog. A vengeful S-list is an S-list. That kind of thing. Those things are super important, okay? That's it for extend.